Have you ever walked down a busy city sidewalk, felt the rumble of a subway train beneath your feet, and wondered what else is down there? We tend to think of cities as two-dimensional maps, grids of streets and avenues. But history has a vertical dimension, and sometimes the most fascinating stories are burying themselves in the dark, damp silence underneath the pavement. It is the classic iceberg theory of urban planning. What we see, the skyscrapers, the storefronts, the traffic, that is just the tip. Beneath the concrete skin of America's oldest cities lies a labyrinth of forgotten infrastructure, old sewers, abandoned utility lines, and forgotten subways. But in the 1920s, a specific group of enterprising criminals looked at that subterranean world and saw an opportunity. They saw a highway system that the police couldn't patrol. Exactly. We are talking about the golden age of the bootlegger tunnel. While the federal agents, the famous Prohibition agents, were smashing barrels on the street corners for the newsreel cameras, millions of gallons of illicit alcohol were flowing silently just 10 to 20 feet below their boots. From the intricate limestone passages under Chicago to the crimping tunnels of Portland and the steam tunnels of New York City. And this wasn't just digging a hole in the dirt, right? This was engineering. This was logistics. This was city planning, but for the underworld. Today, we are peeling back the asphalt to reveal the secret arteries that kept the jazz age roaring. Welcome to the underground. I'm your host, and I'm your co-host. This is the story of the secret tunnels under America's cities. To understand why these tunnels exist, we have to set the stage. It is January 17, 1920. The Volstead Act goes into effect. The 18th Amendment is the law of the land. America is officially dry. But as we know, the thirst didn't go away. In fact, it got sharper. The demand for alcohol skyrocketed because it was suddenly a forbidden fruit. The logistics of supply and demand are powerful forces. Overnight, a massive industry had to go dark. If you were a brewer, a distiller, or just a tavern owner, you had two choices: close up shop or take it underground. And in many cases, they took that quite literally. The initial problem for bootleggers was transportation. Moving a bottle of whiskey in your coat pocket is easy. Moving 500 barrels of beer from a brewery to a distribution center and then to 50 different speakeasies is a logistical nightmare when every truck on the road is subject to search. And the police were getting better at spotting the trucks. They were setting up roadblocks, they were analyzing tire tracks. The surface world became a war zone. Hijackings were common too, rival gangs stealing shipments. So if the roads are dangerous and the police are watching the alleys, where do you go? You go down. It's important to note that many cities already had underground infrastructure. By the 1920s, major hubs like Chicago and New York had steam tunnels, coal delivery chutes, and complex sewage systems. The smart bootleggers realized they didn't always need to build from scratch. They just needed to connect the dots. It reminds me of the catacombs in Paris or Rome, but repurposed for capitalism. The scale of money involved here allowed for massive bribes, yes, but also for construction budgets that rivaled legitimate businesses. We aren't talking about a dirt crawl space. We are talking about reinforced tunnels with electricity, ventilation, and pulley systems. There is also the element of the raid. The speakeasy culture relied on the vanishing act. When the feds busted down the front door, the patrons and the evidence needed to disappear. A trap door behind the bar leading to a tunnel that connected to the basement of a bakery 3 buildings down, that was the ultimate insurance policy. Let's start in the capital of bootlegging, Chicago. If there is one city that mastered the art of the underground, it was Al Capone's playground. The geography of Chicago actually helped. The city had literally raised its street level in the mid-19th century to install sewers, leaving a sort of phantom lower level in many districts.
Right, the raising of Chicago created these void spaces almost by accident, but the bootleggers were intentional. Let's talk about the tunnels under the Green Mill Cocktail Lounge. This was a favorite haunt of Capone. Legend has it that trapdoors behind the bar led to a warren of tunnels used to escape raids and move product. And it wasn't just the Green Mill. There was a massive system of coal tunnels under the loop, miles of narrow-gauge railway originally designed to deliver coal to building furnaces and remove ash. These were the Chicago Tunnel Company lines. They were 40 feet below the street. While they were meant for freight, bootleggers reportedly utilized them to move vast quantities of beer right under the noses of the police. Imagine the sheer audacity of that. You have legitimate city workers down there, and then suddenly a crate of Canadian whiskey rolls by. But let's move west, Los Angeles. We usually associate LA with sunshine and Hollywood, not dark tunnels. But downtown LA has roughly 11 miles of service tunnels. The LA tunnels are fascinating because they were often used for moving high-profile booze to high-profile people. During Prohibition, the corruption in the LAPD and city government was staggering. Some of these tunnels connected the Hall of Justice to other municipal buildings. Rumor has it that confiscated liquor was moved through these tunnels not to be destroyed, but to redistributed to the mayor's parties. Talk about a closed loop. And in Kingman, Arizona, a smaller spot but a crucial way station on Route 66, you have a complex network underneath the city streets connecting the Elks Club and local hotels. It shows that this wasn't just a big city phenomenon. Anywhere there was money and thirst, people started digging. We have to mention Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Canada. It became known as Little Chicago. Since Canada didn't have the same prohibition laws at the same time, it was a supply hub. The tunnels of Moose Jaw are incredibly sophisticated. They were originally steam engineer tunnels, but Al Capone is rumored to have visited to oversee the northward logistics. They say if things got too hot in Chicago, the bosses went to Moose Jaw and lived underground. The engineering required for some of these purpose-built tunnels was impressive. We have reports of tunnels in New York seemingly dug by professional mining crews. They had to shore up the walls with timber, install lighting, and figure out air circulation. If you are rolling heavy barrels, you need a flat floor. Some of these tunnels had concrete floors poured in secret. Imagine mixing and pouring concrete in a basement at 3 a.m. without the neighbors noticing. That's the Great Escape problem. What do you do with the dirt? In Eureka Springs, Arkansas, another tunnel hub, the geography is limestone and hills. They utilized the natural caves and expanded them. But in flat cities, they had to back the dirt and remove it in legitimate delivery trucks, little by little. It was a massive covert operation. There is also a darker side to these tunnels, specifically in the Pacific Northwest, the Shanghai tunnels of Portland. While bootlegging was a huge part of their usage in the 20s, their history is tied to crimping, kidnapping men to serve on ships. But during Prohibition, these trapdoors, called deadfalls, were perfect for dropping kegs from street level directly into the underground secure zones. The functionality was key. In New York, specifically in the West Village, archaeologists and construction crews still find these odd connections. A bricked-up archway in a cellar that seemingly leads nowhere. When they break through, they find a dusty passage connecting to the brownstone-like store. It speaks to a time when your neighbors were your co-conspirators. Then, in 1933, the dam broke. Prohibition was repealed. The 18th Amendment was history. The massive, lucrative infrastructure of underground smuggling was suddenly obsolete. You didn't need to hide a beer delivery anymore. You could drive a Budweiser truck down Fifth Avenue with a marching band if you wanted to.
So, what happened to the tunnels? That is the tragedy and the mystery. Most were simply abandoned. They became liabilities. If you were a building owner, you didn't want a secret passage to your neighbor anymore. It was a security risk. So thousands of brick walls went up. Entrances were sealed with concrete. The city forgot them. They became time capsules. For decades, they sat in the dark, gathering dust, rats, and rust. But urban development is relentless. As cities built deeper foundations for skyscrapers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, construction crews started hitting these voids. There are stories of excavators punching through a wall and finding a room with rotting wooden crates and 1920s newspapers. In Los Angeles, some of the tunnels are now used for fiber optic cables or storage, but many are strictly off-limits due to seismic risks. However, in places like Moose Jaw and Portland, they realized the history was valuable. They turned them into tourist attractions. You can actually go down there, smell the damp earth, and see the cramped spaces where millions of dollars changed hands. It changes your perspective on the city. These tunnels are a physical testament to the lengths people will go to defy a law they don't believe in. It's an architectural rebellion. And many of them are still there, unmapped, unknown, waiting for a sinkhole or a renovation to reveal them again. So the next time you are walking through the city and you hear a hollow sound beneath your step, or you see a grate venting steam from the sidewalk, stop for a second. You might be standing right on top of a ghost highway. Thanks for listening to Hidden History. We'll see you in the next episode. Have you ever walked down a busy city street, maybe in Chicago or New York, felt the rumble of the subway or a passing truck, and wondered what exactly is beneath your feet? I try not to think about it too much. Usually I just assume it's sewers, power lines, and maybe a few rats.
That's what they want you to think. But in the 1920s, that subterranean world was arguably more alive and certainly more profitable than the world above ground. We aren't just talking about utility pipes. We are talking about fully lit, reinforced, sophisticated highways built exclusively for crime. This is the classic image of Prohibition, isn't it? The secret knock, the hidden bookcase, the trap door. Exactly. But the trap door had to lead somewhere. And it wasn't just a root cellar. Today we are going deep underground to map out the secret arteries of the Prohibition era. We are looking at the engineering marvels that bootleggers constructed right under the noses of the federal government. I'm intrigued by the scale of this. I think most people imagine a small dirt hole connecting a garage to a house, but you're implying something industrial. Industrial is the perfect word for it. You have to remember the sheer volume of alcohol being moved. We aren't talking about a flask and a hip pocket. We are talking about thousands of barrels, millions of gallons of beer and spirits that had to move from breweries and ports to the speakeasies without ever touching a public street. So let's start with the why. Obviously, the law changed in 1920 with the Volstead Act, but was digging tunnels really the most efficient way to break the law? It was a simple calculation of risk versus reward. In the early days of Prohibition, bootleggers used trucks. They would hide whiskey under crates of produce or furniture. But trucks get stopped. Trucks get hijacked by rival gangs. And trucks are visible. Right, if you're Al Capone, you don't want your inventory sitting at a red light next to a police cruiser. Precisely. The streets were dangerous, not just because of the police, but because of the tunnel vision of turf wars. The underground offered silence, secrecy, and security. If you control the tunnel, you control the flow. It eliminated the variable of traffic and the variable of prying eyes. So where do we see the first major adoption of this tunnel strategy? I have to assume Chicago is near the top of the list.
Chicago is the undisputed capital of the bootlegger tunnel, and it wasn't just because of Capone. The city itself was actually raised up in the mid-19th century to install a sewer system, which left a lot of strange, empty voids beneath the current street level. But the bootleggers took it a step further.
They had a head start with the city's geology and history. They did.
But let's look at the coal tunnels. Chicago had an extensive network of small-gauge tunnels used to deliver coal to building basements and remove ash. By the 1920s, as heating systems modernized, some of these were falling out of use. The syndicate saw them and said, free real estate, repurposing infrastructure. Very smart. So how did they utilize them? There are legendary stories about the tunnels connecting the darker parts of Chicago history. Take the Green Mill Cocktail Lounge, for example. It's still there today, a fantastic jazz club. Back in the day, it was a favorite haunt of Al Capone. Legend has it there remains a network of trapdoors and tunnels underneath that allowed Capone to escape if the heat came around the corner. I've heard of the Green Mill. It's famous for that booth Capone supposedly sat in, where he could see both doors. That's the one. But the tunnel served a dual purpose. Escape, yes, but also supply. Imagine a tunnel running from a nondescript garage blocks away directly into the basement of the club. You could roll barrels of beer all night long, and the neighbors would never hear a thing. It seems like a massive engineering project, though. Who was digging these things if they weren't already there? That's where the demographics of the 1920s come into play. You had a lot of immigrants, many with mining backgrounds or construction experience, who were looking for work. The pay for digging a secret basement expansion was significantly higher than legal construction work. Silence was part of the paycheck. So you have crews digging by hand, probably at night, often, yes. And they had to be clever about the dirt, the spoils, as they call it in excavation. You can't just walk out the front door with wheelbarrows of dirt without raising suspicion. They would bag it up and remove it in small quantities, or sometimes, if they were near the river, dump it directly into the water under the cover of darkness. It reminds me of The Great Escape, shaking the dirt out of their pant legs. It was very similar, but on an industrial scale. And in Chicago, it wasn't just tunnels for walking. There were rumors, some confirmed, of actual piping systems. Imagine a plumbing system, but instead of water, it's pumping beer from a brewery directly to a bottling plant blocks away. Wait, actual beer pipelines? That sounds like a myth. It sounds insane, but raids uncover rubber hoses and lead pipes running through sewers and specifically dug conduits. It makes sense if you think about it. Why carry a heavy barrel when you can turn a valve? It was the ultimate modernization of smuggling. So Chicago had the coal tunnels and the beer pipes. What about New York? The geology there is granite. That's not easy digging. New York was a different beast.
In Manhattan, you are dealing with the Manhattan schist, very hard rock. You can't just dig a tunnel with a shovel in an afternoon. So in New York, it was more about connecting existing basements. You have these row houses and brownstones sharing walls. They would punch through the foundation walls to create a labyrinth connecting an entire city block. So you enter a bakery on the corner, go downstairs, walk through 3 basements, and pop up in a speakeasy halfway down the block. Exactly. This was famously done in the West Village and Hell's Kitchen. It made raids incredibly difficult for the police. They would bust into the speakeasy, and by the time they got the lights on, the patrons and the bartenders had vanished through a hole in the wall that was now covered by a heavy shelving unit, the classic sliding bookcase.
It's a cliché because it was real. The 21 Club in New York is the most famous example of this engineering. They had a secret wine cellar that was concealed by a massive brick door. The door weighed 2.5 tons. The only way to open it was to insert a meat skewer into a specific crack in the brick to trigger the mechanism. That is some James Bond level stuff. And this was the 1920s. The architect who designed it was actually very proud of it. During a raid, the staff would trigger a mechanism that swept the bottles off the shelves and down a chute into the city sewers, smashing them. The police would find the secret room, but it would just smell like wine. There would be no evidence left. That is heartbreaking for the wine, but brilliant for avoiding jail. Let's move west. I feel like the West Coast has a different flavor of underground history. Let's talk about Los Angeles. LA in the 1920s was booming, and it was corrupt to the core. There is a verified network of tunnels under downtown Los Angeles, specifically around the Hall of Justice and City Hall. These were originally pedestrian tunnels and utility corridors, but during Prohibition, they became the highway for moving booze between government offices and the underground watering holes on Spring Street. So the government officials were using the tunnels to get their own illegal drinks? Oh, absolutely. The corruption in LA was legendary. There's an old speakeasy called King Eddie Saloon. It's still there. In the basement, you can still see the bricked-up entrance to the tunnel system. It was practically an open secret that the mayor and the police chief were drinking the confiscated liquor, delivered via these very tunnels. It really highlights how the tunnels weren't just for criminals. They were for the hypocrites in power, too. It was a symbiotic relationship. But we also have to look at the Pacific Northwest. Portland, Oregon, and Seattle have the famous Shanghai tunnels. Now, historically, they have a dark reputation for crimping, kidnapping sailors, but during Prohibition, they were repurposed almost exclusively for smuggling liquor from Canada. Because they were so close to the border, the flow must have been immense. Immense. The Seattle Underground is fascinating because the city was rebuilt on top of the old city after a fire, so you have these storefronts that are literally underground. It was a ready-made city for illicit activity. You didn't even have to dig, you just had to unlock a door. I want to circle back to the engineering for a moment. We talked about digging and dirt removal, but what about things like ventilation and lighting? If you're moving thousands of barrels, you can't do it in the pitch dark with a candle. This is where the ingenuity shines. They tapped into city power grids. Bootleggers were stealing electricity on a massive scale to light these tunnels. You'd find bare bulbs strung up every 10 feet. As for ventilation, that was harder. They would often tap into the chimneys of the buildings above or use existing sewer grates to pull in fresh air. It smelled terrible, but it was breathable. I can only imagine the smell. Damp earth, sewage, and spilled whiskey. A distinctive aroma for sure, but security was the other engineering challenge. They installed electric buzzer systems. If a lookout on the street saw a police car, they'd press a button hidden under a stoop, and a buzzer would sound down in the tunnel, giving the workers time to scatter. It really was a military operation. Now, a lot of people listening might be wondering, do these still exist? Can I go find one? The answer is a complicated yes and no. Many were filled in. The cities, especially in the 50s and 60s during infrastructure booms, filled these voids with concrete to stabilize the roads. But many still exist, often forgotten. Where is the best place to see one today? If you want the tourist experience that is actually historically rooted, go to Moose Jaw in Saskatchewan, Canada. Canada? I thought we were talking about American Prohibition. We are, but Moose Jaw was the supply hub. It was called Little Chicago. They have an extensive tunnel system that is open to the public today. It was the northern terminus of the bootlegging trail. The trains would load up there and head south to Chicago. That's a great travel tip. What about in the US?
Eureka Springs, Arkansas is a hidden gem. It's a Victorian spa town built on steep hills. The geography required massive retaining walls and street leveling, which created a distinct underground Eureka. During Prohibition, this was a safe haven for gangsters to cool off, and the underground storefronts became speakeasies. You can tour them today.
And for the more adventurous urban explorer, I have to issue a disclaimer here. Do not go exploring unauthorized tunnels. It is dangerous. Bad air, collapse risks, rats. But in cities like Cincinnati, there are huge abandoned subway tunnels that were never finished. They were used by bootleggers because they were just sitting there empty. Occasionally, the city opens them for tours. I've seen photos of the Cincinnati subway. It's haunting. Just miles of empty track beds. It is. And during the 20s, it was the perfect place to stash inventory. It's cool, dark, and underground. The ideal warehouse for whiskey. We've talked about the big cities, but I assume this happened in smaller towns too. Absolutely. Any town with a mining history was a prime candidate. Butte, Montana, for example, known as the richest hill on Earth for its copper. It had a wildest west reputation in a massive labyrinth of mining tunnels that were easily adopted for vice. You have to realize, Prohibition didn't stop drinking, it just drove it downstairs. It's interesting to think about the logistics of the safe house. The tunnel has to end somewhere safe. Right. We often find that tunnels connected a legitimate business to a residence, a bakery to a house, a funeral home to a garage. Funeral homes were actually perfect fronts. Why funeral homes? That's morbid. No one wants to look in the back of a hearse, and hearses are large vehicles capable of carrying heavy loads. A tunnel from a funeral home basement to a nearby speakeasy was a very common setup. It was respectful silence above and a party below. That creates quite the mental image. I want to touch on the decline of these tunnels. 1933, Prohibition ends. What happens to the network? Overnight, they became obsolete. The moment you could drive a Budweiser truck down Main Street legally, the expense of maintaining a secret tunnel wasn't worth it. Many were simply abandoned. They were boarded up and forgotten. So they just sat there rotting? For decades, yes. And this leads to some amazing modern discoveries. There are stories of construction crews in the 1980s or 90s renovating an old building, tearing down a basement wall, and finding a room full of rotting crates and empty bottles from 1928. That would be the ultimate time capsule to stumble upon. It happens more often than you'd think. In 2018, in a building in Philadelphia, they found a stash of Prohibition-era liquor hidden in a false wall that was likely accessed via a basement tunnel that had long since collapsed. The history is still physically there, waiting to be found. It makes you look at every old building differently. Is there a hollow space behind that brick? Statistically, in older cities, there is a non-zero chance that there is. But the legacy of these tunnels isn't just about the alcohol. It's about the resistance to authority. It was a physical manifestation of the public saying, we disagree with this law, and we will literally move the earth to get around it. It was the ultimate civil disobedience, conducted underground, and highly profitable civil disobedience at that. We also have to mention the connection to the waterfronts. Cities like Boston had tunnels leading directly from the wharfs to the north end. Rum-running boats would offload at night, and the crates would disappear into the seawall. The seawall tunnels, that sounds dangerous with the tides. It was. There were instances of smugglers getting trapped by rising tides. It was a gritty, dangerous business. We romanticize it with the flopper dresses and the jazz, but the guys in the tunnels were working in mud, darkness, and constant fear of cave-ins or police raids. Did the police ever use the tunnels against them? Like, did they find a map and infiltrate? Maps were rare. You don't write down a conspiracy. But yes, the untouchables and other federal agents eventually got wise. They started looking for fresh dirt. They started monitoring electricity usage. If a dilapidated warehouse was using enough power to light a stadium, they knew something was up underground.
Following the utility bills, that's how they get you. Always. Al Capone went down for taxes, and the tunnels were often found because of logistics. But even when they found one, the network was so segmented that they might catch one shipment, but the rest of the web remained intact. It's a game of whack-a-mole, a subterranean game of whack-a-mole. Now, I want to mention one more specific location that people might not expect. Washington, D.C., the nation's capital? You'd think that would be the hardest place to dig. You would think. But remember, the politician who voted for the Volstead Act during the day wanted a whiskey sour at night. There are persistent rumors and some architectural evidence of tunnels connecting Senate office buildings to nearby private residences and speakeasies. The famous Green Man tunnels? Parts of that lore, yes. While some of it is exaggerated, the reality is that D.C. had a thriving underground alcohol economy, and the tunnels facilitated the hypocrisy of the political class. It's symbolic, really. The laws are made above ground and broken below it. So as we wrap up this tour of the underground, what is the takeaway? Why should we care about these dusty old holes in the ground? We should care because they are a testament to human ingenuity and determination. When a population wants something, they will find a way to get it. These tunnels are the physical scars of a failed social experiment. They remind us that you can't legislate morality, especially when there's a shovel and a profit margin involved. And they add a layer of mystery to our daily lives, knowing that as I walk to get my coffee, I might be walking over a path where Capone's men rolled barrels of beer. Exactly. The city has layers. We usually only see the surface, but if you know where to look, if you know which basement door to open or which alleyway to check, the history is right there. It's dark, it's damp, and it's fascinating. So next time you're in an old Taz club or a historic hotel, ask the bartender. Ask them if the basement goes anywhere interesting. You might just get a wink and a nod, or if you're lucky, a tour. Thanks for taking us underground today. I'm going to watch my step on the way out. Keep your eyes open. You never know what's beneath the pavement. When you look at a city like Chicago, the complexity creates a staggering paradox. You see a bustling, loud metropolis above, but beneath the pavement, there was a silent secondary city designed solely for evasion. It wasn't just about hiding, it was about high-speed transit. Exactly. Al Capone is obviously the name everyone jumps to. Rumor has it that the Green Mill Cocktail Lounge had trap doors leading to brick-lined tunnels that allowed Capone to escape onto the street before the cops even breached the front door. But it goes deeper than just escape routes. We are talking about massive logistics. Right, think about the weight involved here. A barrel of whiskey isn't light. You can't just drag that through a muddy hole in the ground. These tunnels often utilized reinforced concrete, old coal chutes, and existing steam tunnels. They were retrofitted with rails in some cases to roll inventory silently from the drop-off point directly into the basement of a speakeasy blocks away, without a soul knowing. And out west, the narrative shifts slightly. In Portland and San Francisco, you have the infamous Shanghai tunnels. While originally used for the dark practice of crimping sailors, come Prohibition, they were repurposed. The infrastructure was already there, waiting to be filled with contraband liquor arriving from Canada. It makes you wonder how many of us walk over these hollow spaces every morning on our commute. In New York, beneath the West Village, excavators are still finding passageways that don't appear on any official city utility map. They are structural ghosts, and the engineering required to keep them secret involved bribing city planners to simply look the other way while the underground empire flourished.